Relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Queensberry's First Lady, Raven Chapman, was in action in Dubai on what wasn't a Queensberry Promotions show. She was in action against veteran journeywoman Fatuma Yazidu, who she beat. She beat her like a drum. She beat her from pillar to post, from round 1 to round 6. Fatuma Yazidu, a veteran of 29 professional contests, 29 professional bouts, having lost 8 of them, having been stopped in 6 of the 8. You know, if this were a 10-rounder instead of a 6-rounder, I think Raven Chapman would have got the stoppage. She was well on her way to stopping Fatuma Yazidu. Raven, who ahead of this fight sported a professional record of 4 wins, no losses, and no draws with 2 knockouts, 5 wins now after the shellacking she put on Fatuma Yazidu. I happen to think that if this fight would have went on just a little while longer, Raven would have racked up another knockout. Fast flurries, fast combinations with a lot of mustard on them, alternating from the head to the body. She was really drilling Fatuma Yazidu, pinning her down, keeping her back on those ropes, keeping her pinned down in the corner, and unloading. Hellacious combinations, hellacious shots. It's a wonder Fatuma Yazidu went. It's a wonder she was able to go the distance. It's a real wonder that certain moments in this fight, as Raven Chapman has Fatuma pinned down on those ropes and Fatuma's not fighting back, the ref didn't decide to stop this thing and wave it off. I mean, Fatuma Yazidu was never in this fight. But credit to her for surviving. That's the most you can say. Raven Chapman, one of my personal favorites. She started off this fight hard and fast, and what sometimes happens in a situation like that is the woman opposite the ring, she realizes early on, she just ain't got it for this fight. She ain't got it for this fighter, so the most that she can hope to do is survive. Shell up, try to weather the storm, and just hang on. At that point, the opponent stops fighting, and it's harder to knock out an opponent that's shelling up and just trying to survive, because the openings aren't there anymore. They're not fighting. Rather, they're doing the opposite of that. They're not fighting. They're circling away and shelling up and not trying to win rounds. I mean, it really is harder to knock out an opponent that's made a decision. They're just going to be happy surviving, and that's very much what we saw in this fight between Raven Chapman and Fatuma Yazidu. Billed as a 6-rounder in the featherweight division. Featherweight, that's 126 pounds. That's where Karis Ardingstall, Sky Nicholson, Sarah Liegman, and Sophia Leash all campaign. That's where Amanda Serrano and Erica Cruz reign as champions. It's a talent-rich division, a talent-rich weight class with a proliferation of unbeaten up-and-comers, promising young fighters like Raven Chapman. Consider that 3 major platforms in the United Kingdom all have a pony in that show. Queensberry has Raven Chapman, Sky Sports has Karis Ardingstall, Matchroom's got Sky Nicholson and Erica Cruz. Jake Paul's Most Valuable Promotions, they promote Amanda Serrano. Kale and Nisei Sorland of Wasserman, they've got Sarah Liegman and Sophia Leash. So when you have that many major outfits with prized stallions campaigning at a given weight, what that essentially means is that division is going to get more coverage moving forward, perhaps more coverage than the women's featherweight division has ever garnered in the past, because at no point in the past have this many major promotional outfits, well-to-do outfits with resources, at no point in the past were there ever this many talented young unbeaten up-and-comers in the featherweight division. This division is set to heat up in the very near future, as it is one of the more competitive divisions, one of the deeper ones, one of the deeper weight classes in the sport of women's boxing. Now, if you're wondering how it was that Queensberry's First Lady, Raven Chapman, was able to box on some other promoter's show, well, I remember when I talked to Raven some months ago that a part of her contract was that she would get to fight a certain amount of times per year, even if it's off platform, even if it's not a BT sports show. Raven has that wiggle room, that liberty to fight on other platforms and fight on other promotional shows. I vaguely recall some mention of that, and that's quite beneficial because that means that Raven's not stuck on an island. If she has to go to a Sky Sports or perhaps a Matchroom for a particular fight, an important one, it seems that she can. Raven Chapman, a fan-friendly fighter, a mid-range to inside combination puncher with fast hands, fast feet, and a whole lot of spite. She's got a mean streak. You'd never know it to talk to her, but she's fucking dangerous. One of my personal favorites. She advances to a professional record of 5 wins, no losses, and no draws with 2 knockouts. Congratulations to her as she continues to impress and progress in today's featherweight division. I have no doubts This is a fighter who will see herself become a champion.
More than just a champion, this is a fighter that could go all the way.
Congratulations to her. In men's welterweight news, an interesting set of quotes from unbeaten up-and-comer Jaron Boots Ennis, who says, "We only fought once in 2022 because everybody was waiting for Spence and Crawford." And I find that quote quite curious because what's that got to do with Jaron Boots Ennis? If you knew that both champions are preoccupied with each other, that's all the more reason to book yourself a fight. Book yourself two more, if anything.
How the hell else are you going to raise your profile and get a buzz going?
We only fought one time this year because everybody was waiting for Spence and Crawford, said Ennis during an interview with YSM Sports Media. That didn't take place, so we got to fight somebody. I don't care who it is, but we want to fight somebody. That means something.
As Derek alludes to, Jaron's pugilistic schedule this year consisted of roughly 4 minutes of actual work.
On May 14th, the Philadelphia switch hitter notched yet another explosive victory, this time at the expense of Custio Clayton. Although he remained sequestered on the sideline since then, he was awarded handsomely for his latest triumph.
I'll tell you, it makes absolutely no sense for a young, unbeaten fighter like Jaron Boots Ennis to fight only once this year, because how's he supposed to build a buzz?
At this point in the juncture, only really hardcore boxing fans know who Jaron Boots Ennis is, and only they really want to see what he's capable of at a higher level. And
you're not going to develop mainstream appeal boxing only once a year. And moreover, Jaron Boots Ennis is one of these fighters that's a bit of a hot potato, a high risk, low reward for the more established names, the more established welterweights.
I mean, not exclusive to Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., not exclusive to the champions, but the other guys that have some notoriety, at least some, at 147 pounds. The only way you get one of those guys in the ring with Jaron Boots Ennis is at gunpoint.
Get in the fucking car.
I don't know that we can point the finger at Cameron Duncan, Jaron Boots Ennis' promoter. I tend to lay the blame at the feet of Showtime. Showtime as a platform, Showtime as a network, because if they are so invested in this fighter to where he can't box on any other platform, they should be able to get him out there at least more than once. And waiting on Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. to settle up with each other, that has absolutely nothing to do with Jaron Boots Ennis. I mean, I understand that this is a guy who's on the cusp of fighting for an alphabet title, but everybody knew
those guys were knee-deep in negotiations with each other. So how do you hold up your own fighter's career worrying about those guys? In all likelihood, he won't get either of them in the ring.
Doesn't make a ton of sense, to be honest with you. You had Keith Thurman, who boxed earlier this year against Mario Barrios. And ideally, what could have happened and what should have happened with some pressure from Showtime would be a Thurman versus Ennis fight, because that's just what the doctor ordered for Jaron Boots Ennis. He needs that fight with that fighter that fight fans are already familiar with, that former champion.
You know what I see? Thurman sat on the shelf waiting for a title shot, waiting for things to fall apart between Terrence and Errol, so that if they do, he can step in and get fast-tracked to an Errol Spence Jr. fight. But ideally, Jaron Boots Ennis should have been able to get his hands on that guy, because they both only fought once this year.
And if you can't get Keith in the ring with Jaron Boots Ennis, well, what about Riverside Rocky? What about Radzov Butayev?
The welterweight division ain't a barren weight class, you know. There are ample names to go around to where this guy should have at least fought 2 more times this year.
I'll tell you, I think Jaron Boots Ennis has a lot of promise. This is a kid with a high ceiling, but I fear for his future so long as he's on the Showtime platform, because look at...
He's on the same side of the street as a lot of familiar faces. He's on the same side of the street as a lot of guys, and he can't seem to get to any of them.
And I don't know that that's ever going to change.
147, 154, it's the same situation. Those are all Heyman fighters.
Jaron Boots Ennis himself is not an, according to Hoyle, Heyman fighter. So from 147 to 154, how does he have the meaningful fights?
Al Heyman pretty much has the run of the place at those 2 weights. It's the same situation, whether he moves up or stays there.
I'm telling you, I don't know what's going to happen with this guy, and I don't know what Cameron Duncan and Showtime are actually doing for him. He just pissed away the better portion of a year fighting for only 4 minutes.
Talk about your gargantuan wastes of time.
In men's super featherweight news, the WBO have officially ordered negotiations between Emmanuel Navarette and Oscar Valdez for the newly vacated 130-pound world title, the world title that Shakur Stevenson lost on the scales in his last fight against Robson Conceição. They'll have 10 days to negotiate before purse bids are called, and
they're not going to need a purse bid for this one. They've been bouncing around this idea for at least a year now.
As far back as when Jamel Herring was still WBO champion, well before he fought Shakur Stevenson and lost the brown belt belt to him. They've been playing with this idea, and the opportunity is finally here, as there is a newly vacated WBO title that both men can fight for. This fight would require Emmanuel Navarette, otherwise known as El Vaquero, the cowboy, to move up in weight from 126 pounds up to 130. And given his physical dimensions, I think he has the frame to properly fill out at 130 pounds, though that doesn't necessarily make this the ideal fight for a smaller fighter moving up in weight.
Stylistically, Oscar Valdez has the edge. Stylistically, boxer-puncher versus pressure fighter tends to favor boxer-puncher, as they have the right balance of both offense and defense, knowing when to lay into the guy and when to lay off, when to use his aggression against him. As anyone familiar with Emmanuel Navarette knows, this guy's a bucket of aggression. That's his calling card, always has been.
Kind of like Miguel Berchelt. You remember that guy? Emmanuel Navarette has proven to be a devastating puncher at 122 and a devastating puncher at 126, and given his frame and his youth, I have no doubts that he could still be a concussive puncher as high as 130 pounds. But stylistically,
Oscar's got the edge, and Oscar has power of his own. Oscar's a tough bastard.
And Oscar, unlike Emmanuel Navarette, is fully acclimated to this weight. He's fully acclimated to the super featherweight division. Oh, Oscar, much like Emmanuel Navarette, is a guy who moved up from 126 up to 130, but he's been there for some time now, had a couple of fights there, gotten his feet wet. He's won some fights, lost a fight, but all things considered, I feel like Oscar Valdez has the edge here. This fight would presumably go down at some point in the first or second quarter of next year, the fight between Oscar and Emmanuel Navarette, and it promises to be an all-action fight, an all-action shootout, a Mexican classic, I dare say.
You really want to see two guys go at it, you get two Mexicans in the ring, and they won't disappoint you.
Tell you that fucking shit. This is an opportunity for Emmanuel Navarette to become a three division champion, and this is an opportunity for Oscar Valdez to see himself crowned a champion again, a champion at this weight. He reigned as a champion at 126, more recently at 130, but he lost his title to Shakur Stevenson.
This is a chance for him to rejoin the champions bracket.
And as stated, given that he's already acclimated to super featherweight, that he's had a couple of fights there, stylistically I think he has the edge, and overall, I like Oscar's chances in this thing, perhaps more than most. Look for this early next year. And finally, a startling bit of news by way of the heavyweight division. Eddie Hearn took to his social media and stated, just received a written order from the IBF for unified champion Alexander Usyk to face mandatory challenger of Croatia, Filip Hrgovic, next. And
why does it seem like the IBF is Johnny on the spot with everybody else at every other weight except at welterweight when it comes to Errol Spence Jr.? He hasn't satisfied a mandatory for them. I mean, there hasn't been a mandatory challenger satisfied at 147 pounds in years.
Oh, this might be a bit of good news for Eddie Hearn and Matchroom and his fighter, Filip Hrgovic, that, in one way, shape, or form or another, Usyk must oblige him. Yeah, that's good news for them, but that's not necessarily good news for the fight fans, because what the fight fans want is the Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury undisputed title fight. Now, the IBF, quite conveniently, is standing in the way of that.
It's convenient because they don't seem to bother Errol Spence Jr. I mean, they'll pester everybody else, but not him.
Joe Cordina won the IBF title from Kenichi Ogawa earlier this year. He ended up injuring his hand, and as a result of that, he couldn't satisfy his mandatory challenger, Rakhimov. They stripped him in a jiffy. They stripped him right away.
They don't bother Errol Spence Jr. They don't even bother Jermel Charlo, who's got a mandatory outstanding, a guy who's been waiting in the queue since 2019, the Murtazaliev guy.
Now, what do those two guys have in common? I'll tell you what they have in common. They're both PBC fighters. Has the PBC formed yet another unethical relationship with a sanctioning body similar to the one people speculate they already have with the WBA?
It's starting to look that way.
On the undisputed front, Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury for the undisputed heavyweight world championship is being targeted to take place no earlier than February 18th and no later
than March 4th, according to Aegis Climax. Usyk's manager.
The last we heard from the Usyk people is, on our side, everything is done. It's right now under Tyson Fury's decision. They left the ball in his court to move forward with the fight. And I don't understand. If that's where they are with this thing, why is the IBF?
Why are they crashing a party? If the paperwork is all sorted and everything is done, everything is where it should be to move forward with the fight, why is the IBF standing in the way?
This order would be an opportunity for Matchroom to get those 3 alphabet titles back on their side of things. Hypothetically speaking, if Hrgovic were to share the ring with Usyk and he were to win, you could then set up a fight between Philippe Hrgovic and Anthony Joshua worth a lot of money, though we are getting ahead of ourselves because I don't think it's too late to petition for an exemption to the mandatory so that they can move forward with this fight, this undisputed heavyweight championship.
If the IBF can be so fucking understanding for the last 4 years when it comes to Errol Spence Jr., and they can be so lenient with Jermell Charlo,
I don't see why they shouldn't grant these guys an exemption, sort things out. This is the most important fight in the heavyweight division and one of the bigger fights you can hope to make in the entire sport. Now, granted,
it's not as big as it could be. It's not as big as it would be if Anthony Joshua were involved, but better still, this is one of the more relevant fights, one of the more significant fights the entire sport has to offer. So why is the IBF standing in the way?
I mean, I think Alexander Usyk himself and his team would rather move forward with the Fury fight than be sidelined and sidetracked, blindsided really, by this situation with the IBF.
And they are being blindsided.
I think they are. Seems like the IBF wants to do their job in some divisions and be a little bit more lackadaisical in others.
Just doesn't make sense.
They're putting Alexander Usyk on the spot. And if it gets to a situation to where the IBF won't budge, but Usyk won't either, he's either going to have to comply with this order or surrender the red belt, at which point fighting Tyson Fury will no longer be for the undisputed heavyweight championship. So reconciliation really is needed here.
Their timing is impeccable.
Many obstacles and obstructions. The undisputed heavyweight title fight has had titles changing hands, mandatories getting in the way, negotiations going awry. I mean, Jesus Christ!
Will you just leave these guys the fuck alone so they can fight?